Okay, good morning. We'll get things started. Thank you all for joining. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today for the cybersecurity webinar for the construction industry. We are excited to announce that we had over 150 participants registered for our call this morning. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time to join us. I know many of you are coming from our association partners, ECA, AGC, and NESCA. Thank you to those who are attending from those partners. And I want to say a special thank you to Jill Renwick, Brendan Manning, and Sue Furlong for their help in organizing this event. Thank you to all of you folks. With that, I want to first start off by going over a disclaimer and a few housekeeping items. Rick, if you can switch to the next slide. We do have a few panelists on the call who are licensed attorneys, and they appreciate us and our insurance company partner for reading this disclaimer. To please note that the following is intended to be used for general guidance purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice nor dispositive position on coverage. Each claim is subject to review by the applicable insurer, and coverage is dependent upon the terms and conditions of your specific insurance policy. I want to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a copy of the recording to all participants within the next 24 to 48 hours. Hopefully that isn't a cue for everyone to leave the call because they're getting a recording. We do want you to stay. We want you to participate in Q&A. So please stay on the call. But if you do find this webinar useful, we invite you to share it with your colleagues, your IT provider, your fellow association members, anyone who you think it might be useful. Please feel free to share that recording. If you do have any questions during this presentation, please enter them into the chat box, not the Q&A. I know many presentations ask for you to enter it in the Q&A, but we're asking please enter it into the chat box. We will try to address your questions throughout the call, or at the end of the call. We've dedicated some time for Q&A as well. We've also included on the upcoming slides our contact information. So feel free to reach out to any of our panelists. We're happy to answer any questions after the call. And with that, I want to just outline what our agenda is for today. Obviously, cybersecurity is a hot topic, a very important and relevant topic in our world today in general, but it's also specifically important in the construction industry. And in fact, the construction industry is one of the most targeted industries for cyber attacks today. So first, I will outline the introduction and roles of our panelists. We have a very good group of speakers today. They will be talking about claims and impacts on the construction industry. They'll help everyone understand cyber insurance and cybersecurity protocols in general. And we have a few key takeaways that we want to leave everyone with at the end of the call. If nothing else, my personal takeaway is if you're not currently purchasing cyber insurance, we ask that you at least consider it. Going through the underwriting process alone will teach you a lot about your current security measures and exposures. Even if you choose ultimately not to purchase the coverage, you will learn a lot going through the process, and we feel it's a very worthwhile exercise for your company. And in order to go through that, feel free to contact your broker, or you can call and contact us at NFP. We're confident we can help tailor a program to fit your specific company needs. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists. So driving and leading our webinar discussion today will be my colleague, Rick Cavalier. Rick is a senior vice president in our national cybersecurity practice. He is our placement leader for our practice, designing optimal program structures and negotiating directly with our insurance carrier partners. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rick Otis. I'm the Vice President, NFP, and my role is to advise construction companies on the most cost-effective and cost-efficient insurance and surety programs that are available in the marketplace. I'm big on my clients having peace of mind, knowing that they're properly protected in the most cost-efficient manner. And I believe cyber insurance is a big component of that peace of mind and achieving that peace of mind, and a good tool to help protect your company's balance sheet. Also at NFP, we have Courtney Mauger. Courtney is a senior vice president, and she heads our entire cybersecurity practice. As a licensed attorney, Courtney brings a tremendous amount of expertise to our clients through the lens of navigating complex insurance policy language and providing direction on complex claim scenarios. Courtney is a thought leader in the industry and is a highly sought after industry speaker and an author of various cybersecurity papers. Courtney, thank you for joining us. We also have two partners from Coalition Insurance. Coalition is a great insurance company partner of NFP. They are a leading provider of cyber insurance and security in the world. And with us from Coalition, we have Zach Solin and Rich Gatz. Zach is a breach response coordinator, cybersecurity and compliance specialist with Coalition. And in his role, Zach has consulted for some of the largest construction firms in the world on cybersecurity risk. Rich is a cyber insurance and privacy expert at Coalition. He is a distinguished member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and he has over 13 years of experience in handling cyber claims for construction companies. And last but certainly not least, we have with us Jennifer Coughlin of Mullen Coughlin Law Firm. Rick, can you switch to the next slide? Thank you. Jennifer is the founding partner of Mullen Coughlin. Her firm is dedicated to exclusively representing organizations facing data privacy events, information security incidents, and the need to address these risks before a crisis ever hits. To say that Jennifer is an expert on this topic is probably the understatement of the year. So Jennifer, thank you for joining us. You'll be a great contributor to our discussion today. And with that, thank you to all of our panelists. I'm looking forward to a great discussion, and I'll turn the microphone over to my colleague, Rick Cavalier. Thanks, Rick.
Great, thank you, Rick. And again, echoing Rick's statements and sentiments, we really appreciate everyone's time. This is a presentation designed for you. And so please jump in with any questions as part of the chat. We want to ensure that you walk away having a better understanding of cyber exposures and cyber insurance. And we're really pleased to have the panelists with us today that we do. So we're going to start with, we want to kick it off with something that's relevant. And that's how we've designed the entirety of this presentation. So I'd like to kick it over to Rich to do a discussion on two case studies that are actual scenarios that have impacted others and could impact your company. Rich?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. And I do definitely agree that we have a bunch of fantastic panelists today. But I'm here as the claims guy, right? The one that doesn't mean to, but usually ends up scaring people because I have a lot of recency bias with some pretty bad things that come in across my desk every day. And so I think it's very important when looking at cyber insurance as, contrasting it from, other lines of insurance, because this is a problem that's not going away. And it's something that's going to get worse. Something that I've done on other presentations before is to kind of get the seriousness of cyber insurance through to some people, and how it mitigates risk is to ask everyone to kind of close your eyes for a moment. You don't really have to, right? But close your eyes. Imagine you're waking up on a Monday morning and you check your phone and there's 200 missed text messages, 30 missed calls. And one of two things has happened. One, either all of your computers are encrypted, or a funds transfer fraud went out for multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even $50,000, and everyone's freaking out. Well, the first question is, what do we do, right? And so having cyber insurance is a great way to kind of mitigate that risk and kind of understand, okay, we have to be, and I guess if you backtrack a little bit about me, I'm an attorney by trade, data privacy professional, but I'm not a security specialist, but I've worked on a ton of these claims. And something that I hear quite a bit is, as defenders, we have to be perfect. And as attackers, they just have to be lucky, right? And I sometimes say, getting hit with a cyber insurance claims like winning the bad luck lottery. So because of that perfection, and because we can't be perfect, it's not in our nature as humans to be perfect, you need something to mitigate that risk, and that is cyber insurance. So the first case study we're going to be talking about today is email phishing and funds transfer fraud. We had an insured that was a $200 million revenue construction company. And as a lot of construction companies do, they send out a lot of money. They're paying subcontractors, they're paying for goods and products and things like that. And part of kind of the risk of a company that interacts with a lot of other entities is not only do you have to essentially maintain the security of your computer systems, of your email network, you also have to hope that the other entities that you're dealing with are doing the same. The famous example is the Target breach, where Target never got breached. Their security systems were great. However, there was an HVAC vendor who, for some reason, had like higher level admin access to the Target network, and those credentials were never changed, right? And so that allowed the bad actor to gain access to Target through that HVAC subcontractor. And so in this specific instance, we had the insurance construction company had one of their subcontractors who had an email breach. So the actual email breach was not on the insured's computer systems. And so the payment change instructions went directly from the actual email account of their vendor and looked legitimate, right? It was on the bank letterhead. Everything looked great, just the account numbers were different. And unfortunately, they lost $800,000 through the phishing scam. Now, luckily, in part due to the broadening of the cyber insurance policy over the past couple of years, there's coverage under most cyber insurance policies for funds transfer fraud. Something to look forward to or look to when evaluating your coverage, and this is something that your brokers can definitely assist with, is trying to determine, okay, what type of coverage specifically would respond here, and does it require security failure or data breach on your computer systems? Some market leading policies, including Coalition, we don't require security failure. We just require a fraudulent instruction to be sent. And so because of that, I think the insured was only out around $25,000 out of that $800,000 loss. Next slide, please. And so ransomware is one of the things that I love and hate to talk about. I hate talking about it because I just hate what this kind of epidemic is doing to the world currently. But I also like talking about it because, you know, it's very easy to frame cyber insurance, cyber incidents when you have like this like incredibly bad thing to frame it with, right? Like a ransomware attack is the nuclear bomb of cyber incidents. So when you have something like this that happens, and fortunately, a lot of companies don't have experience with ransomware claims, but it really is the worst case scenario in a lot of situations, right? And that's why you need a robust cyber insurance offering that, you know, has coverage for ransomware attacks and will help you restore and whatnot. For this specific case study, it was a $150 million revenue general contractor in Texas. They were attacked with Hello Kitty. Hello Kitty is nasty. You wouldn't think so because of the name, but they're one of the more nasty like threat actors that we deal with. Okay, they will call up your office, they will call up your family members, and they will like really kind of do what we're calling like a triple extortion, right? They'll encrypt your files, they'll threaten to publish them, and then they'll also reach out and try to, you know, personally threaten people into payment. And so because of actually this insured having some good backups, we were able to recover from backups. This didn't include data mining, right? And so for those that don't know, data mining is trying to determine what type of information was potentially accessed or exfiltrated by the threat actors, right? All 50 states, and Jen, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, have a privacy notification requirement. So if you have the personally identifiable information of clients or customers or even employees, you have to notify them of any access or exfiltration. And so this kind of goes back to like a robust cyber insurance offering, right? You don't want something that will just pay the cyber insurance, the ransomware claim, because in a lot of cases, we don't need to make payment to these criminals. But you want to make sure that it can holistically respond to help you recover from backups, restore any data that's been, you know, corrupted or encrypted if possible, notify any customers or clients or other third-party corporate entities that might have had their information accessed or exfiltrated. And then, you know, something too that I think is really, really important from a cyber insurance perspective is making sure you understand and work through your broker and NFP, like how are things paid out on a claim? And I'm sure we might talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's really important from a case study perspective on ransomware is the language you want to look for is pay on behalf. Okay, because that means that the cyber insurance carrier will pay on your behalf and it's not a reimbursement or indemnity policy. And that's super helpful when dealing with an expeditious response in the worst case scenario of having to pay a ransom claim.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. That was very helpful, and I appreciate the highlighting some of the exposures and actual claims facing the construction industry. What we want to turn our attention to now is some of those unique cyber exposures in the construction industry, and to help guide that conversation, we're going to look to Courtney and Zach. So Courtney, if I could kick it over to you to have a discussion on an overview of the cyber insurance.
Yeah, so I mean, we just started with, what are some of the different ways that you could be triggered? What could trigger an insurance policy? So let's just take a step back and make sure that we understand what the cyber insurance policy is there to do. So when we think of cyber insurance on a very fundamental basis, a cyber policy is there to cover the loss to any entity where there is a compromise to either data or your network. If you think about it like that, that's the best way to understand when your cyber policy should respond. If you break it down even further, there are two different types of coverages that could be triggered from more of a broad perspective under that cyber policy. There's first-party coverage, and then there's third-party coverage. So let's start with first-party coverage, because I think that's the type of coverage that we tend to think about most when we think about all of the different types of cyber claims that hit the news or what we know about. So first-party coverage is the out-of-pocket expenses an organization incurs to recover from a loss. So let's go back to the example that Rich stated with Hello Kitty and ransomware to really understand what that means. So in the event that you had a ransom attack, the first thing you're going to want to do, outside of course, notifying your cyber liability carrier, is you're going to want to reach out for help. A cyber liability policy is going to connect you with that carrier, who is then going to connect you to the top resources that you're going to need to respond to that claim. And that's when these first-party coverages are going to be triggered. So, for example, the payment to reach out to an attorney, the costs that are associated with that. Maybe you're in a position where data was compromised and you have to comply with privacy and data notification laws. That's going to come out of those breach response costs. And perhaps you're in a situation where you have to pay the bad actor. That is also going to come under that first-party coverage. And we'll get into a little bit more of the specifics. But if you kind of think through a ransomware attack and really think of the types of coverages that could potentially hurt your entity due to that compromise, that's where the first-party coverages is coming, those initial costs that you need to respond. The next is third-party coverage. And we think about that maybe a little bit more down the line, and that is going to be any resulting liability or third-party action as a result of a cyber incident. So let's say you move past the actual incident, but now you have individuals that were compromised because of that ransomware attack. Perhaps they may seek to recover loss through litigation because the underlying thought is perhaps you didn't protect their information quite so well. Those third-party coverage costs are going to come back to help you fight that claim and pay for the defense and damages of that claim. So Rick, if you could move to the next slide. Here gives you kind of a better outline of all of the different types of insuring agreements that could be covered. Again, when we think through that ransomware attack, and it'll probably become even more clear as we go through the slides on this presentation as we walk through an actual event, you can see where the different insuring agreements can be triggered. So again, those first-party costs, breach response costs, cyber extortion, perhaps stolen funds, then of course, lost business income. So that would be any lost business income to your company over the course of the time that you were down that you would have incurred, but for that ransomware attack occurring in your network not being able to operate. And then there are lots of other different insuring agreements that have come through. So for example, at the bottom here, I won't get into them, but the cyber insurance policy, from the best benefit before when we were in a soft market, the policy itself became very robust, and it even goes even further to things such as computer replacement, technology failures, and even more. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zach to talk about some of the more unique exposures.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I think it's always helpful to frame it in, what does this mean for a construction firm itself? And really every firm nowadays, regardless of the industry class, is a technology company or relies on technology to some degree to maintain a competitive advantage and realize efficiencies, manage costs, and really just to continue to operate profitably. Construction firms of all types, no matter where you are in that kind of value chain or process on the job site, face the same kinds of exposures that other industries do from an office environment perspective, including phishing, funds transfer fraud, social engineering. Rick mentioned ransomware. I like to think of ransomware as an equal opportunity disruptor. They are looking for low-hanging fruit and common vulnerabilities, and really just the regular person clicking on a link that they shouldn't. But construction firms do face a unique set of challenges that others do not. Specifically, distributed network environment with portables on site that you have on the job site. Maybe you have laptops, tablets, phones, specialized networking equipment for those folks that are actually doing the physical work on the job site. Even, as we're seeing the kind of proliferation of IoT or Internet of Things with drones being used to survey job sites, the attack surface, as we like to coin it, which is just the amount of network devices, is expanding exponentially, and it's kind of pervasive in every industry. Another kind of disturbing trend that we're seeing is the hacking of heavy machinery. So you see on the top right here, smart buildings, building information modeling systems, your supervisory control and data acquisition, these industrial control systems that are kind of where the physical and digital world meet, and the programmable logic controllers that control those machines are vectors for bad actors to get in, move laterally within the network, and even create an environment where physical bodily injury is possible. A kind of lesser known, but a very kind of pertinent risk to the construction industry itself is the business associates agreement. So if you look on the top left, you see HIPAA data violations. One of our underwriters that we work with, who's worked on pretty much every industry under the sun, including a lot of construction accounts, recommended I mention this due to some of the claims that he's seen. This raises your exposure significantly if you do enter into a business associates agreement, and puts the signee under a scrutiny of HIPAA law. So you will, in the potential claim scenario, you would have to prove that you have a certain baseline of encryption standards, network security controls, and really can kind of create an environment where a claim scenario could get out of hand, and litigation costs, defense costs, damages, ensuing fines and penalties that are levied by the FTC is under that purview as well. So as I said, you face a lot of the same, quote unquote, mundane exposure sets that every company and every industry faces, but you have that physical component as well, where bad actors, again, to Rich's point, with these kind of folks like Hello Kitty that are looking to inflict pain and do anything they can to get you to pay a ransom, are looking to do so. That's where a great cyber insurance policy comes into play. All cyber insurance policies are not created equal. That's really our value proposition as Coalition. We believe in this prospect of active insurance, where it's not a PDF that sits in your shared drive and collects dust, virtual dust, if you will. And it's more than a financial risk transfer vehicle. It's really a crucial part of prudent risk management and an incident response strategy at that as well, and it has to be. The insurance carrier and incident response vendors like the Mullen Coughlin Group that we have here today are partners, and they should be looked at as such. And they're of the utmost importance to engage immediately during a cyber incident. In this sense, the insurance carrier, especially, and those incident response coordinators as well, matter so much to engage early and often, because we can come in and really assess the situation, get the right folks involved when it comes to funds transfer fraud, potentially claw back that money that was stolen by a bad actor, and we would love the opportunity to show you kind of what that looks like. We'll follow up this call with a request for just 3 or 4 high-level data points so we can actually show you what we mean by active insurance and what that value proposition is.
Great, thank you, Zach. Thank you, Courtney. That was very helpful and informative. Now what we'd like to turn our attention to, and that serves as the foundation for this next discussion, but we're going to turn our attention to a claims case study. And for that discussion, I'm going to kick it over to Jen Coughlin and Rich Gatz, and we'll have that conversation. Jen, if you want to start off by having a discussion as to the incident response stakeholders, and then we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. So similar to what Rich said, we never really mean to scare anybody, but it just kind of ends up happening every single time we talk. So we're going to do something fun. We are going to go through an actual event. And if we were all in a room, we would require audience participation. But since we aren't all in a room, Rich and I will just banter back and forth, and we hope there's a lot of takeaways that everybody gets from the fact pattern. But first, I'm going to talk about the incident response stakeholders. So what you've heard thus far in the presentation is that you as a victim are a stakeholder in the incident response process. Your broker is a stakeholder in the incident response process, and your carrier is a stakeholder in the incident response process. But there are many other stakeholders that may become involved in the incident response process. And before you have an event, you should take the time to, 1, identify and recognize who those stakeholders are, and 2, to the extent that you can, have conversations with them now when you're not in the middle of a crisis. We always encourage organizations to not speed date the people that you will be working with very closely in the middle of an incident. So I already talked about the first 2. The third is the incident response counsel or breach coach. So like NFP and Coalition said, that's what we do. We come in as counsel for organizations that experience a data privacy incident to assist them in investigating and responding to the events, engaging other stakeholders underprivileged to the extent the other stakeholders' involvement is necessary, and provide counsel to the organization from a legal perspective on what, if anything, they need to do to disclose the events or to memorialize their response to the event. Now, sometimes you see other insurance carriers involved in the incident response process as well. And Rich, I don't know if you want to talk about it, because from the claims perspective, you're going to be interfacing with the other carriers that may get involved.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, it's something very important, and something that NFP does very well is making sure that all carriers are involved on a claim as soon as possible, right? Depending on the policy, there might be different notification requirements in regards to putting the carriers on notice. And then also understanding kind of there's an other insurance provision in most policies that will control how the different carriers interact with each other. The most common interaction, frankly, is between the cyber policy and a crime policy, specifically in regards to funds transfer fraud and cyber crime related matters. But, we're all kind of, I've never had, knock on wood, a bad experience with another carrier when there's been coverage for an insured. It's really just making sure that, that you're complying with the provisions and specific conditions of each policy to maximize the coverage available.
So another stakeholder is law enforcement. I'm sorry, Rick, thanks. So law enforcement does play an important role in the incident response process. Will they come in and do the investigation for you? No, that's not their role. Their goal is to fight cybercrime and help you to the extent that they can, but they recognize they are stretched thin. The goals are different that they have compared to what yours are, which is to the extent you catch the baddies, okay, great. To the extent you fight cybercrime, okay, great. But you want to become operational. You want to be made whole. So it's very important that law enforcement is involved in the incident response process, but just everybody please understand they will not be doing the investigation for you. Who will be doing the investigation? It will be the forensic investigation firm. The forensic investigation firm will come in, again, we engage them to assist in identifying what happened, how it happened, is it ongoing, what steps must be taken to prevent something like this from happening in the future, and then what data, if any, is at risk as a result of the incident. Sometimes they also provide restoration services. So if you experience a ransomware event and you are restoring either via backups or via utilization of the decryption tool that you purchased from the threat actor, sometimes the forensic firm does this in-house. Other times it's a different stakeholder that's involved in the process, a different organization. And similar with the extortion, negotiation, and payment firms. Some forensic firms do this in-house. Other times you need to engage an organization that does the negotiations with the threat actors and makes the payment to the threat actor.
Data mining. So Rich talked about this earlier on in one of the scary case studies. So what is data mining? You need to understand what data is or was accessed or acquired or may have been accessed or acquired by the threat actor, because we need that information to make a legal determination on your disclosure and other obligations you may have as the event. So sometimes the forensic firms do this in-house, other times it's a different firm that we're bringing in to do a programmatic and then a manual review of the data set identified by the forensic investigation firm to be at risk. Other legal counsel. So sometimes we do bring in other counsel such as international counsel, SEC counsel, ethics counsel, depending upon the organization impacted and depending upon the impact as well. And public relations firm is another type of organization that you may see involved in the incident response process to assist in messaging regarding the incident, a messaging strategy, developing communication points that will be utilized internally and externally by the victim organization when addressing the data privacy incident. Notice mailing and call center provider. So that's another organization that may be involved. And this organization would be the one that prints the letters, mails the letters, operates a toll-free call center that individuals impacted by the event or individuals seeking additional information about the event can call, and they can receive a response within a timely period after they inquire. And the communication that is utilized by the mailing and call center provider, the letter that they're mailing, the FAQs that they're reading from when somebody calls, that's something that's developed by counsel and the victim organization. Credit and identity monitoring and restoration services. So there are some laws that require these services be offered to impacted individuals under certain circumstances. Sometimes organizations just offer those services to those required. Other organizations offer the service to everybody, regardless of whether or not they're legally required to do so, so that everybody impacted and similarly situated is being treated in the same exact way. And then insured business partners. So oftentimes you are going to be working with vendors or customers of yours that may have had the event. So like Rich said, in the first case study where the business email compromise didn't occur on the victim organization's network, the organization that wired the money out, it actually happens at a vendor or somebody that has a relationship with the organization that wired the money out. So oftentimes you're working with other people that may have been impacted or may have caused the event to happen to you to understand exactly what happened and get to the bottom of the impact to your organization. All right, Rick, if you don't mind moving forward. Oh, go ahead, Rich,
Jen,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to jump in real quick because I thought of something that I think is important to remember from kind of a coverage perspective and insurance policy perspective. First off, as you can see from Jen, is that there's a bunch of different stakeholders that might need brought in to assist in the remediation. All of that needs to be done through counsel, okay? Because we want to maintain, I don't know if you've talked about this, Jen, I do apologize for being redundant, but I do think it's important because in that way we can maintain some sort of attorney-client or work product privilege with the investigation that's being undertaken. But before that, you need to notify your insurance carrier to the extent possible of the retention of any of these vendors. Right? Depending upon your policy, some policies will, let you notify panel providers without notifying the insurance carrier. Other policies will require notification even before retaining panel providers. And so it's very, very important that you keep your insurance provider in the loop because you want to maximize your coverage. Okay. And the worst thing in the world is when a carrier is constrained by policy language in regards to notification, and they're unable to provide coverage because they weren't given notification of the policy. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rich. So Rich stole my thunder on this slide. I was gonna say, you see a roadmap of the potential incident response process up on the screen. So what is your takeaway here? The sequence of events will not always be the same. You may not need to take every single milestone that you see on the screen. However, in every single event, you should definitely be dealing with 1, 2, and 3 right away. So what's number 1? Detection. Detection of the event impacting your systems or impacting the security of your data, which could be your data stored on somebody else's network, like your payroll provider. The second is mobilization of your incident response team. So you should have identified before you experience the incident, the individuals at your organization that will be involved in the incident response process. Who are those individuals? Who are their backups? What is their contact information? How will you get in touch with them when they experience an event? And what is their responsibility under the incident response plan that you should have? The third is the notification to the carrier and engagement of breach coach. So like Rich said, there is a set of vendors that are approved by the carrier. Does that mean you can just run off into the sunset, do whatever you want with them, and then turn around and say, hey, Rich, here's a bill for $1 million. I used somebody on panel, so it's fine, right? Just reimburse me. No, that's not how it goes. I can't talk coverage. I'll let Rich talk more about that. And he highlighted it a few minutes ago. But it's super important to get the carrier and the broker involved and the incident response council involved as early as possible so that we can set the incident response roadmap in the right direction right away. We can ensure that you have the opportunity to work with your broker and work with your carrier to understand exactly what is covered under your insurance policy and what's required under your insurance policy, including consents that may be required before you do any type of vendor engagements. The notification to law enforcement, I talked about that on the last screen. That's something we do as our standard operating procedure. We do that very early on. When you're dealing with a ransomware event, we are notifying them within 24 hours of us being engaged. If it's a business email compromise matter and there's a wire fraud component to it, we want to notify law enforcement as well as early as possible so that they can initiate the financial fraud kill chain and recover as much money as possible. The next step is the privileged engagement of a forensic investigation firm. So like Rich said, privilege is super important. What does that mean? In basic terms, we want to bring in a vendor. We are going to tell them what they need to do on behalf of you. They are going to deliver us information. We want that information to go to as few people as possible because it's probably going to be a report card with a lot of possibly C's, D's, and F's, definitely. And you don't want that getting in the wrong hands. So that's important because we want to bring that firm in and as your counsel, direct what they're doing so that we can say, we got information, but we're not going to share it with you because we don't have to because privilege applies. The next milestone that you see is an engagement of a PFI. That's a specific forensic investigation firm that may be required in certain circumstances when you have a credit card event. The next step is development of communication strategy. Now you may be saying, are we on day 2? Are we on day 4? No, we're probably on day 1 still. A lot needs to happen in the very beginning. But if you are experiencing an incident, say it's ransomware and your systems are shut down, you're going to have employees saying, what's going on? I can't access my computer. How do I work? You're going to have customers calling and asking questions that you can't answer because you can't turn on the computer that has the information responsive to their inquiry. So it's very important in the very beginning of the incident response process, you are identifying internal and external audiences that you may need to message to, and then determining what you are willing, able, and legally required to tell them at that moment in time. And then identifying who within your organization is going to be delivering those communications, who's going to be empowered to respond to inquiries that they may receive as a result of the incident, and ensure that the messaging that they are receiving and that they are delivering is consistent and accurate, but never so much that you may need to walk it back or you're sharing too much and you shouldn't be sharing that. And then you are doing this over and over and over again. It's a rinse and repeat because every single day, the status of the investigation and your conclusions are going to change, and you may need to change the messaging as a result of that. The engagement of the negotiation and payment firm, I talked about this earlier on. Sometimes it's a service that's offered by the forensic investigation firm. Other times it's another organization that we need to bring in. A key takeaway here is you can engage a negotiation and payment firm without having to make a decision on whether or not you're going to pay. And I encourage organizations to really think about whether or not they need to pay and whether or not they have an appetite to pay at this point in time. But also there's some strategy behind engaging the threat actor in communications to buy some time so that we can lock down the systems, ensure the security, get some information from them on how they got into the system and whether or not they took any data. They are typically willing to share some information that is very helpful to our investigation. But you can engage a firm that engages in communications with the threat actor without committing to payment, and you may not end up making payment after all. Restoration. So this is the backup or key, getting your systems operational again. So what does that mean? When you're dealing with a ransomware event, you may decide, you know what, I have backups from which I can restore. And that's the avenue that I'm going to go. Or I don't have backups, or I have backups for some, but I have alternative sources of data that I can tap into, like vendors that may maintain certain information about you and your organization that you can get a copy from their system and bring them on. You may decide that you're going to recreate the data. We've had plenty of clients say, you know, the super important information on our systems, we also have paper copies of. Yep, it's going to be labor intensive to computerize that data again, but that's what we want to do. We don't want to pay the threat actor. And we also have plenty of clients that say, you know what, I don't have backups, I don't have alternative sources, I don't have the ability to recreate. I'm just going to permanently forego access to the data, start from scratch, and deal with what I have to deal with. The engagement of the PR firm goes back to the development of the communication strategy. We don't engage PR in every single matter. And sometimes the engagement of PR, if it happens, is day one. Other times it's when we know we have to message the event out. The mailing, call center, and credit monitoring providers, I talked about who they are and what they do. The data mining, we talked about that as well. The regulatory interaction. So it's super important to understand that there are certain laws that require disclosures to regulatory agencies when an organization experiences an event. Sometimes the threshold for notification is very, very minimal. Sometimes the timeline for the notification is very, very short. It's going to depend upon the event, the industry sector, and the applicable laws. And sometimes you are put into a position where a preliminary, essentially voluntary notice to a regulator is the appropriate way to go, because you may be experiencing an event that the media has caught wind of, that you know that they're already talking about, and you never want to be in a position where a regulator is coming to you and saying, hey, I heard you have this event. Is there anything that you want to tell me? So when we're working with our clients, we are talking from day one, what's the regulatory framework applicable to your organization? Is there any need for preliminary disclosures to happen at this point? Is there any benefit to preliminary disclosures happening at this point? And then when we determine exactly what data is at risk as a result of the event and what your obligations are, then there may be legally required notices to regulators as well as individuals. So the next milestone, individuals. Like Rich said, every single state has a data breach notification law. What does that say? When there is data protected, typically social security numbers, credit card information, bank account information, driver's license, health information, medical information, but each state defines it a little differently. When you have an event impacting the security of protected data, you will have obligations to notify certain individuals and agencies within a certain period of time via a certain method, sometimes definitely including certain information, or if you're in Massachusetts, not including certain information. So the disclosures will be something that we will be talking with you from day one, so that you're gearing up and understanding who you might have to tell. And then as we go through the investigation, we will make a determination. Definitely have to tell these individuals, let's tell them. So that's the milestone that talks about disclosures as required. And then you have litigation and claims. So Courtney talked about that a little bit with the third-party coverage that you see under insurance policies. Individuals, interestingly enough, individuals have really become desensitized about data privacy incidents over the past few years because everybody's received a letter. Everybody's seen something on the news. However, at the same time as they're becoming desensitized, the law is actually emboldening them. I don't know if I want to be that aggressive, but it's empowering them to consider litigation and pursuing claims because of statutory damages and low thresholds to pursue claims against organizations. So we are seeing a spike in litigation and claims, including single plaintiff and class action, as a result of a data privacy incident from individuals impacted by the event and even individuals not impacted by the event. We're seeing claims from those individuals as well. Rich, do you want to add anything before we jump into the fact pattern?
No, nailed it.
All right, thanks. All right, guys, so now's the fun time. So again, the takeaway from this fact pattern, we want to identify for you flags that we commonly see in the incident response process and what you should be thinking about now when you aren't in the middle of an event, so that you can digest it and prepare for responding to something like this, which I can tell you this fact pattern is based upon real life matters that have come into Mullen Coughlin. So I will read it to everybody, and then Rich and I are going to banter back and forth about the takeaways from the slide. All right. On September 6th, the Tuesday after Labor Day, ABC Construction's office manager attempts to sign on early from her home to ensure payroll is in. She is unable to do so and decides to wait until she is in the office that morning to review payroll. While on her way to the office manager receives a call from a project manager on site saying that he is unable to log in and access plans needed for the job. ABC Construction outsources its information technology needs to XYZ IT. The office manager calls XYZ IT and reports her difficulty in signing in from home and the project manager's difficulty in doing so from the job site. XYZ IT begins an investigation and quickly determines the entirety of ABC Construction's network is encrypted with ransomware. XYZ IT believes the variant is CLOP, as incident response is not included as part of XYZ IT's retainer with ABC Construction. XYZ IT submits a statement of work to ABC Construction, noting that it will cost $150,000 to conduct the investigation. All right, so I will go first. First flag, Tuesday after Labor Day. The threat actors are very familiar with the US holiday calendar. They target organizations when they think there will be little to no staff working because they are enjoying something like a 3-day weekend that happens in September, Labor Day. And the reason they do that is because if they can be in the network undetected, the longer they're in the network undetected, the more damage they can do. So number one, be aware of the fact that the threat actors are very familiar with the holidays that we celebrate in the United States, and we see targeted attacks around those calendar days. Number two, the office manager deciding to wait until she is in the office that morning to review payroll. So this fact identifies the importance of employee training and immediate notification, because again, the longer the threat actors are in the network, the more damage they will do. So she should be trained. If she can't sign on to her computer, she should be submitting a ticket to support. She should be calling somebody immediately. Somebody needs to be made aware of the event. Number three, ABC Construction outsourcing its information technology needs to XYZ IT. So a few things about this outsourcing. One, there are plenty of organizations that outsource their IT needs, and that is fine. That is a perfectly acceptable way to operate your business. The outsourcing of your IT needs to an organization is something that we see all the time. Will that organization, like XYZ IT, be the appropriate organization to assist in the investigation and response to the incident? No. Because if they are involved in the security and architecture of your network, they may be responsible for the event that you are experiencing. So that's number one. Number two, they may not have the experience that you need for the investigation, and they aren't the best position to do it. Number three, chances are they aren't approved by your insurance carrier, so you aren't going to see any coverage for the fees associated with their response. And number four, here, they have a retainer. So I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but there is a practice that is becoming more and more common of organizations putting incident response firms on retainer, putting firms that can provide those services on retainer. It's a two-party agreement, so there is no privilege applicable to that arrangement. And again, you are promising to work with a firm in a certain capacity that is probably not the best position for it. So I encourage organizations, if you can talk to all of the panel providers and get a comfort level before you experience an incident, that there will be availability, there will be capacity, and they have the experience needed, do that. Absolutely do that. Number four, XYZ IT beginning an investigation. I'm not involved in that. There's no privilege. There's absolutely no privilege to what XYZ IT figures out in that investigation. Number five, the SOW. Again, they aren't panel approved. So if you go to Rich with a bill for $150,000 in a few months, Rich, I won't put words in your mouth, but I think Rich is going to be like, that's fine. We're going to pay you within 24 hours. So Rich, I'll turn it over to you, and you can discuss the flags that you see.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed everything that I would talk about, but I do have one war story where I had an insured that was encrypted. They used their XYZ IT entity to remediate. XYZ IT said the only way to remediate was to install an entirely brand new network. Okay, everything, new computers, new servers, new Wi-Fi infrastructure, everything. And the insured didn't notify us until a month or two after, and they give us literally a $230,000 bill. And I'm looking at this and, with shock and awe and all that stuff. And I see it and I get some more information. It was a $3,500 ransom event. All of their stuff wasn't even encrypted. Okay, so this is something that we probably would have been able to remediate for 25 to 50K, and they would have kept all of their infrastructure. And so it's just kind of an example of, you want to make sure that, if you're playing the game, you have players on the field that know how to play the game, right? And I mean, even though, if someone knows how to play baseball, all right, they can hold a cricket bat, but probably don't want them to play cricket, right? And that's kind of how I analogize, IT professionals and then incident response professionals. And the one comment I have here is this also goes very much towards attorneys. Okay, it's not just your IT provider, it's also attorneys, to make sure that they have knowledge in regards to data breach response, incident response, and data privacy laws.
Yeah, I had a matter come in a few months ago where they utilized their local counsel that they utilize for everything. And then they notified their broker. It came up during a renewal, and the broker said, well, how did you handle it? Who did you work with? And then they called us and just said, hey, we just need to verify exactly what we did was accurate. And they sent letters out to individuals spelling breach, B-R-E-E-C-H, which is the position of a baby and not what happens when your information is potentially compromised. And they notified a whole bunch of regulatory agencies that they had no legal obligation to, but now they were in the middle of regulatory investigations.
Oh.
So the takeaways from this, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, no, it can be, sorry, it can be dangerous. And also you have to watch out for, data privacy and incident response is a very important legal subject matter area today, right? And so there's a lot of law firms, for better or worse, want to break into that. And so if they can use a trusted client to train up their associates and partners on data privacy and incident response, they will do so. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with that if they're a reputable law firm and they're doing things in a right way. Would probably prefer panel counsel. But the problem is when they start charging their clients for that education. I had one very well-known firm that billed my insured 72 hours for a 50-state survey on data breach privacy statutes and regulations. All of the customers of the insured were located in 3 states. So, it's kind of just something to watch out for.
So the takeaways from this fact pattern: 1, you need employee training, earlier detection and mobilization of the incident response team. That should have happened here. 2, notification to the carrier. The carrier should have been one of the very first calls that ABC Construction made, and getting counsel involved. And number 3, don't engage your local IT or your outsourced IT provider to assist in the incident response process until you talk to your carrier and until you talk to counsel. All right. So the next fact pattern, the next injection. On the afternoon of Tuesday, September 6th, the ABC Construction engaged a panel-approved law firm to provide incident response counsel. The law firm engaged a panel-approved forensic investigation firm to conduct the investigation. The forensic investigation firm deployed an MDR solution to all 50 endpoints on the ABC Construction network. The forensic investigation quickly revealed the ransom note, wherein the bad actors demanded payment of $10 million in Bitcoin in exchange for a decryption tool and threatened to release data it had exfiltrated from the network if payment was not made. On Wednesday, September 7th, it is determined that the ABC Construction office manager received a phishing email on September 2nd, the Friday before Labor Day, as she was rushing out of the office for vacation. The phishing email purportedly came from a subcontractor and purportedly included a document that noted design changes made at a recent job site that needed to be placed in ABC Construction's file for the job. The office manager was prompted to enter her system credentials to access the document. When she received an error message after doing so, she decided she'd follow up with the subcontractor after the holiday and left the office. That same day, the office manager's credentials were utilized by a bad actor to access the office manager's email account and to remotely access the network and move laterally throughout the system. The bad actor was in the system for the entirety of the holiday weekend. The bad actor deployed Clop ransomware on the evening of Labor Day to the entirety of ABC Construction's network. Rich, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I'd love to. And so, something that, again, is you'll see is that when things get really bad, there's usually like multiple errors, right? And there seems to be with ransomware unique parts of the situation of circumstance that could really assist in the recovery and remediation. But because people weren't either properly trained or weren't really thinking about things, it is kind of like snowballs, right? So the big thing that jumps out here is, obviously leaving for vacation. So again, another example of these threat actors knowing our work environments. I call it the Christmas morning problem, right? Like cyber insurance and panel, privacy breach coaches and incident response firms. We don't get holidays off. Okay, we just don't. We celebrate Christmas a couple weeks before, but and that again is something that a lot of people don't think about because you're looking forward to the holidays. So having a higher level of appreciation of kind of how these threat actors act and what they're doing and what they're looking for can really, save a lot of money at the end of the day. But, here, the phishing email purportedly came from a subcontractor, right? And it also, and what I'd like to highlight here is included a document that noted design changes made at a recent job site, okay? These threat actors will sit in an email inbox for months. They will sit on your network for months. They will learn exactly how you do your business. They will understand your pay flow. They will understand who your payroll processor is. They will understand how you do invoices. They'll even copy like how you talk. Okay. And so I've had claims where the insured that was hacked or the, was impersonated. They're like, I thought I sent this email. Okay. Because it's identical. So these are very professional, very sophisticated actors that will do this. And so, and then you see here another example too. And outside of that, the office manager, following up the next day, right? Not my problem, right? And I have a lot of friends, and my father was in the military. And something that the United States military at least does very well is everything's your problem, right? You want to escalate everything, because if you're maintaining an airframe or if you're on a forward operating base, right? Like, see something, say something. And that is also very important from a cyber incident perspective, because, it only takes moments to encrypt a network. And so the sooner you find out, the sooner you can stop that access, the more likely are you to have a successful remediation. And then again, too, deployment of ransomware in the evening of Labor Day is just terrifying, right? Because you probably don't have the staff on board, and you might not have people even monitoring. Even if you do have an EDR solution, even if you do have some of the more sophisticated programs and processes to kind of forestall a ransomware event, you might not be actually, at the bow of the ship watching for the iceberg, so to speak.
So kudos to ABC Construction for obviously notifying their carrier, getting panel approved counsel, and panel approved counsel getting a forensic investigation firm in here. And one of the benefits that you get from working with a panel approved forensic investigation firm is that we know already it's CLOP. So on the very first call, you are going to receive really important statistics regarding CLOP and what they're known to do and what they are known not to do, so that you can start making educated decisions on the strategy for responding to the incident. So they've got the right people involved, which is fantastic. $10 million in Bitcoin. Is that normal for CLOP? Yeah, I've actually seen more. I had a CLOP matter where the demand was $60 million. Does that mean that if you make a decision that payment is going to be made, that is the amount that you are paying? No. You typically see reduction. The negotiation goes back and forth. But do you typically see data being taken from your system as part of ransomware events? Yeah, they figured out a few years ago that organizations were becoming better about backing up. So they had no need to purchase the decryption tool. So what could they do to incentivize a victim to pay the ransom, take data and threaten to shame them in the public? And it's working. Organizations do make business decisions to pay so that they can get a promise from a criminal in exchange that the data is not going to be published. So you need to be understanding at this point in time, we are looking at not only exactly how it happened, but we also need to understand the information at risk. They're saying that they took data from the system. What indicators do we have that the forensic investigation is leading us to about what they took? Not only what they took, what they accessed. And here we have the employee receiving a phishing email. So we now know for sure the office manager has received a lot of slaps on the hand and she needs a lot of additional training. But you also need to understand that if they were in her email account, any information in that email account, that may be at risk. So you are concerned about the information on your system, subject to unauthorized access and exfiltration, but also information in her email account and whether or not there are any other email accounts on the system that have been accessed as a result of her falling for the phishing attack. So this is going to be a prime focus of what we are working on in the forensic investigation here. We are also thinking at this point, it's already been a day. What are you telling your employees? What are you telling your subcontractors? What are you telling your customers? They need to know whether or not you can work. And the employees, you don't want them talking to anybody about this event. So what's the messaging that you give to them and the instruction that you give to them to not communicate with anybody about the incident? All right, next slide, please. All right, on Wednesday, September 7th, ABC Construction determined it has viable backups from which it can restore, but it will take 1 week to do so and cost $250,000. ABC Construction also determined that the information taken from the system included the names and social security numbers of all 250 current and former employees. So here, we know that you have backups from which you can restore. You need to know how long it's going to take. So here, it's going to take a week to restore from the backups. So we're already many days into being down. So it's an additional 7 days of being down. It's going to cost $250,000 to restore from those backups though. So being down 2+ days, can you be down for 9+ days? And is paying the ransom and receiving the tool quicker? Here's one takeaway that you should definitely take from this presentation. Paying and getting the decryption tool is not like flipping a switch, and once you get the key, you get access to the entirety of your network. There's a strong possibility that you will not be completely operational 1 week after receiving the key. And you know you can restore from backups, and it will take a week to do so. $10 million is the current demand. $250,000 is the current estimate for restoring from backups. But here you also know that they took data from the system that is protected by state law. So you've got individuals, current and former, that have their data taken by a threat actor, and you will have disclosure obligations as a result of this incident. So are you communicating with those employees at this point in time? Are you waiting to communicate to those employees? Do you have any regulatory agencies that you need to be disclosing this event to? If so, what's the timeline? Are you required to offer any types of services to your current and former employees? Rich, what are your thoughts on this slide?
So
Hey,
a couple
Jen.
one, a couple.
Hey, Jen, before we get into that,
Yeah.
we have had a few questions. And
Okay.
please, folks, please share those questions. One question that came in just now was, how do I know a hacker won't release my data even after we pay them? What has been your experience along those lines? And I am sure that's a common question you received. And how do you typically answer?
Very common and very good question. So will you ever know for sure that the threat actor deleted your data in exchange for you paying them? No, you will not. There is no way to confirm that the data has been deleted. We have seen instances where payment was made for promise of deletion, and months later, the data appears on the blog of a different threat actor. So are they sharing data? Are they closing up shop and rebranding? Yes and yes. And we also know from Conti a few weeks ago that there was a massive dump of chats and data that clearly indicated they received payment for the promise of deletion from several organizations over the past few years, and they did not delete that data. So there's absolutely no guarantee. But an additional piece of information responsive to the question is, when you pay a threat actor for a promise of deletion, that does not forgive you of your sins and requirements to notify individuals and regulatory agencies about the incident. If there's protected data that was taken from your system and you pay a threat actor for their promise to delete it, you still have to notify those individuals. So we understand organizations will make business decisions and say the reputational harm that may occur if that data is released is just too great. And we understand the data may never be deleted, and we will never be able to confirm that, but we are hoping that the threat actor takes this $200,000 and really doesn't do anything else with that data. There are plenty of organizations that make that determination, but there's absolutely no guarantee. We have seen plenty of examples where they have not deleted, and you will still have to disclose the event if there's protected data in there. Rich, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that question.
Yeah, definitely. And this was actually one of the things I was going to raise on this slide is, data is cheap now, right? Like if, being in cyber insurance and incident response as long as me and Jen have, I remember when data breaches was the big deal, right? Like, oh no, like Yahoo or, Equifax, like, the data breaches, right? So people, they get access to the networks, they breach your data and they try to sell your data. Well, now it's all about ransomware, right? That's where these threat actors are making their money. So a lot of times insureds and clients are very, risk averse with their data. And I often have to caution them, your data is already out there. Okay. Specifically when it concerns like social security numbers, right? We could probably spend 4 or 5 minutes on the dark web and get everyone's social security number on this call. Okay. And that's not a joke, right? Like they're cheap. They're like pennies on the dollar, right? And so, the decision to make a payment for non-disclosure needs to be a very careful one. All right, because you run into not only issues with potential future disclosure, right? You still have to notify, as Jen said, but then as well, you could potentially run into aggregation issues on this claim with your policy limit from your cyber insurance policy, right? My goal whenever a claim comes in is to make the insured only pay their retention and cover as much as the claim as possible, right? If you have a large ransom demand and you're going to have restoration costs that are going to exist, even if you pay the ransom, right? And you potentially run out of insurance policy coverage. And there's another slide that on the same injection point that is going to be kind of even more important when discussing kind of a limited liability issue. but you want to make sure that you're safeguarding that limit, right? So it comes down to a cost benefit analysis. And frankly, the cost and benefit of paying a ransom for non-disclosure is very small. That being said, as Jen said, when there's a reputational risk of harm or something else that needs to be considered, that's something that you want to make clear from the very beginning. I had one insured that was a healthcare entity for a marginalized population, and they were very insistent upon paying the ransom. And they had good backups, and the ransom demand was $700,000. And we're like, we can't negotiate any further than this. We don't think it's reasonable or necessary to pay the ransom. Why are you pushing this? Why are you pushing this? And finally, we're on the phone with one of their board members, and they're like, people will die if this gets out. Okay, because we're talking about healthcare for a specific population, and if that gets out, people will die. And we dived into that, and we ended up paying the ransom, right? And so that is kind of the exception, not the rule. And so something that I always caution, prospective insurers or clients or policyholders or just general public is, making sure you understand what data you have and making sure you understand what that data means to you, right? If you have data that if it was published, people would die, you need to protect it, okay? You need to put more money into your cybersecurity standpoint. If you don't, or if you have the Coca-Cola formula, right? If you have a trade secret that if out would completely ruin any competitive advantage you have in the marketplace, right? Don't keep that on Microsoft OneDrive that's not backed up with multi-factor authentication, or don't keep that on a Google Drive or a file server where the CEO remotes in with no password or VPN protection, things like that, right? So yeah, again, don't want to ramble too much, but it's definitely, I think, one of the larger issues that I come across in almost every single one of my ransomware claims. Even when you do have viable backups, do we need to pay for non-disclosure? And as Jen very eloquently said, these threat actors cannot be trusted, and we should frankly only be paying for non-disclosure when you absolutely need to protect the reputation of the insured.
Great, thank you, Rich. Jen and Rich, we have several injection slides remaining. Is there one that we can go to focus in on for the last 5 minutes of this part?
Oh, sheesh.
I know there's a lot here.
I think it might be helpful. So we can go to the next one very quickly, very, very quickly. So on Friday, September 9th, ABC Construction received several calls from customers reporting they'd received emails saying ABC Construction doesn't care about the security and privacy of their information and that someone had taken it from the network. That same day, ABC also receives calls from its payroll vendor saying that it had received suspicious emails from the office manager regarding the addition of 2 new employees, John Doe and Jane Doe, and assigned salaries of $10 million per year. On that same date, Clap also posted to its blog ABC's financials for calendar year 2020. So the threat actor reaching out to your customers, that happens. That is another pressure tactic that they utilize to put pressure on the organization to pay so that they leave their customers alone. So this is something that we would already know could potentially happen because we are working with a firm that deals with Clap and ransomware events all the time. So we would have already been preparing as part of our communication strategy how to deal with the customers. But it's something that you would be thinking at this point, do we need to proactively reach out to them or just reactively respond to them if they do receive any emails and start asking questions? And then the payroll vendor, so that goes to show that the office manager's email account was being weaponized by the threat actor to perpetrate fraud and harm against the organization, continued fraud and harm against the organization, but also to create these identities and receive payments on the side. And hopefully the organization wouldn't detect that it was happening. And we've seen this happen where there are new individuals added to the payroll in the company. It takes them months to realize that these new individuals had been added to the payroll and this money was leaving the system and going to them. All right, we can go on to the next slide too. On Thursday, September 8th, ABC Construction held an in-office meeting with its employees. On Monday, September 12th, it mailed notice of the incident to its current and former employees, as well as several state regulatory agencies. ABC offers all current and former employees impacted by the event access to 1 year of credit and identity monitoring and restoration services. So at this point, we've been working with you to develop the messaging, to get the letters prepared, ensure they're compliant with applicable laws and get them out the door. But ABC has likely already held a meeting with its employees because you don't want your employees to find out for the first time about the event and the impact of them via a letter. If they are in the office and they are a current employee, you probably want to sit and talk to them face to face to the extent that you can. And for former employees, I would encourage you considering telephoning them before sending a letter to them, letting them know that it happens. Rich, I'm not sure if you have anything for this one.
Yeah, no, this is just or not on this one, but the next one, actually, injection 5. So this is what I was talking about in regards to making sure that we protect that limited liability. I had a recent claim, which was a data breach, not ransomware, where we thought it was done, everything good to go, and then we got a class action lawsuit with 115,000 people. And so if you don't safeguard that limited liability and you don't kind of factor in a potential class action lawsuit when deciding you're going to pay a ransomware claim, if you obviously if you have a lot of customer information that could be denoted as personally identifiable information or whatnot, it could be dangerous, right? Because plaintiffs' attorneys are now keying in on privacy-related subject matter claims. Some states, California in particular, have a private right of action against companies that violate their privacy, and they get statutory damages. So that's dangerous from a class action perspective, because if you get a large enough class with a large enough statutory potentially penalty, those numbers can add up quite quickly and create a lot of risk. And then you're dealing with the age-old class action issue of, well, you know, if you have a 10% chance of success on this, you still lose $100 million, and then you end up settling for like 20 million kind of thing. So that's really all I have for this one.
And I will just end by saying we could spend hours talking about the landscape of third-party claims as it relates to data privacy and incident response. But this is just real quick. So former employees, they're an interesting class of individuals, including current employees as well. They talk to each other, they rile each other up, but with former employees, you can probably go through your employee list and say, they're definitely going to sue. We did not end on good terms. We know that they're litigious. They're definitely going to sue. So that's something that we'd be working out with you beforehand. And I've had clients where they were in the middle of litigation with a former employee and now needed to notify them of the event. So the notification to them is handled differently. You work through their counsel. So this is something that we would be working through from as soon as we realize exactly what data is at risk and what disclosure obligations you have. But we are seeing more and more claims. And with that, Rick, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Rich. As everyone can tell, this is an area that can require a lot of expertise. And some of these folks here today were able to highlight some of the nuances to that discussion. In these sorts of exercises, it can take a few hours, but you should be thinking through this process, ensuring that you understand you have the right players and you understand the roadmap and you practice. So, because in that exercise, you learn a lot about what you're prepared for. And then given this, when it happens, because for many organizations today, it's not a matter of if, it is when, you have rehearsed and you are ready to address that particular crisis. And at that point, it is a crisis for your organization. So thank you, giving us some insights into that process in a specific pattern that surely has happened and will happen again. With that being said, we're going to turn our attention to the cyber insurance market and specifically an update as to some of the threats, triggers, and the underwriter focus, as well as some construction industry modeling. So with that, can I turn it over to you, Courtney, for a discussion as to the threats?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be pretty brief because I know we're short on time and there's a number of questions in the chat box that I absolutely want to address. But, you know, so now that Rich and Jen have, I think, sufficiently scared you and you're thinking, okay, perhaps it makes sense to make sure I have a comprehensive cyber policy in place, not just to transfer the risk, but make sure we have direct access to those key stakeholders that Jen discussed earlier, because let's remember, your cyber policy will provide you direct access to these vendors through their panel carriers. So what is that process going to look like when you come to NFP and say, hey, I'd like to get cyber insurance? What do I do? Well, before I answer that question, I think it's important to step back and talk about the state of the market. So you just heard a number of incidents throughout the presentation, and unfortunately, those types of incidents, they do happen a lot. And these incidents are not just frequent, but more often than not, they can actually be very, very severe. And because of that, we have seen a huge shift in the market over the past year where pricing is going up and carriers want to make sure that any entity which they're going to provide insurance coverage to has taken the proper steps to mitigate their cyber risk. So let's quickly break down the types of risks that not only trigger an insurance policy, but are also occurring that are causing the, I would say, heartburn from our carriers. So of course, what we hear in the news the most and probably what is really driving a lot of the claims that we're seeing right now and a lot of the market demand is ransomware. But ransomware is certainly not the only way a policy could be triggered. And it is not the only thing that our carriers have to consider when looking at capacity and premium. So employees, for example, can still cause damage and compromise data from inside of the organization. I think probably the most recent example I can think of that was very, very public was Capital One, where you had a kind of a rogue employee from the inside steal a lot of employee information that she was able to access and then sell it on the dark web. That ended up being, very, very costly to Capital One, and it is something that cyber policy would cover, despite the bad actor not coming from the outside. As Jen talked about, regulatory action still can cause a considerable loss to an organization. So that's something to be aware of. I think most recently where we've seen a lot of large claims is around the BIPA space, mainly because that is a plaintiff-driven type of regulatory action. And then lastly, we have to think about the loss that can be caused simply based on our dependence of a company or on another service provider, or really any vendors that are connected to an organization's network. So, Rich brought up Target. I think that was one of the biggest cyber incidents that hit the news, and that it wasn't necessarily Target's controls that were the cause of the ultimate incident, but its connectivity to a smaller vendor. A more recent example would be SolarWinds, where SolarWinds was hacked. They ended up sending out a patch update to all of those entities that were connected to their server, and then that in turn caused potential malware to be put onto the networks of many of their customers. And so these are all things that our cyber carriers are really having to consider when they look at what type of capacity are we going to provide, what type of coverage, and what is that premium going to be. So Rick, you can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick slide kind of going over the different types of claims that are reported by insuring agreement triggered. So alluding to what I talked about before, as you can see, the biggest insuring agreements, as you may imagine, is breach response. So that is really going to be all of those stakeholders that Jen talked about earlier and in her first incident roadmap plan, everybody that you're going to have to bring in to make sure that you can get your arms really around the claim. And then in the event that you do have a bad actor in your network and you end up having to pay an extortion demand, that is covered by the carrier. And in fact, what some people do not realize is not only is the extortion demand paid for by the carrier, but access to a vendor to help you negotiate that demand is covered by a vendor. So in the interest of time, Rick, if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm not going to go through this, but as I mentioned earlier, the cyber liability market has become what we call very, very hard, meaning that premiums are going up, capacity is reducing, but on top of that, we are seeing a huge shift in what our underwriters are requiring from our carriers. And mainly that is, like I said, they want to make sure that if they are giving insurance coverage to an insured partner, that they are taking the right steps to make sure that their network is protected. So on this slide, you will see a number of common controls that our carriers are looking for that they would find to be adequate and proper protection to a company network. For most of our clients, I would say that the detection and prevention slides are going to be the most important. And I consider that a threshold really to even being able to enter the cyber marketplace, mainly multi-factor authentication for remote and privileged access. It is such a key driver and prevention tool to ransomware that it is almost by far all of our carriers really hone in on that and say, without MFA, either we're not going to offer you any coverage, or the coverage that we offer is going to be very, very limited. So it is something that we work with our clients very early in the process to make sure they're taking that consideration before we enter the market. And so I'll close up there kind of in the interest of time and turn it over to Zach.
Great, Courtney. Zach and Courtney, a question came in and it may be relevant to this particular slide. If an insured has their client employee files housed in the cloud with MFA, how pertinent is it still for the insured to have cyber liability?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Courtney, I can take this unless you.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll let you start and then I'll add on.
Great. So I think kind of broadly, the fact that we have Jen and Rich on it is so excellent at having them walk through what a claim actually looks like. The name of the game, and really the the goal of the game on this slide, is to never have to talk to them ever. Because if you do, that without it being a proactive response is probably a very bad day in the history of your company. So specific to this cloud question, it's a good question. It's one that I help my clients through all the time. I like to think of it as the kind of chain of custody of data. If you are the essentially primary data owner, you're the one that your clients and your employees are entrusting with that information. They don't have any say of how you handle that. If you're outsourcing that to a third party, if you're keeping that on your own internal network, hopefully it's segmented as you see on the slide as well, you are still ultimately responsible for it. And as we saw, these things can get very litigious. These class action lawsuits, anyone that's affected is going to go for everyone that's involved. And if you are found to be negligent, you didn't put the proper controls in place, you went to a cloud vendor, it's still your problem. It's still your data to ultimately secure. As Courtney kind of alluded to, I think it wouldn't be overly productive to go through all of these individual controls, really in detail. I think the main thing you want to get out of this is it's simple access control. It's making sure that folks that are supposed to have access to that type of critical infrastructure and information are the ones that need it to do their job. Similarly, that you wouldn't have someone from accounting go out on the job site and lay concrete or rebar or pilot a forklift or a crane. You don't want someone from accounting to have access to domain level and privileges, to have access to that cloud vendor. So these are basic kind of blocking and tackling that for risk management that I know that all construction companies are really well versed in because of the kind of highly regulated space that you work in, all the OSHA trainings that you go through. These are making sure that the right folks are on the job site, that have the proper credentials. These are essentially the analogous to the way that these controls are set up for your cybersecurity policy.
Yeah, and I would even kind of just throw on really quickly to that question, right? MFA, for cloud backups is a huge mitigator, right, to ransomware and how you are able to ultimately respond to a bad actor. But as I said before, remember that is not the only way a cyber policy could be triggered, and it is not the only way that there can be compromise to your data. So if you think about it in that way and remember that there are many, many, many other ways the data can be compromised, the data can be infiltrated outside of just a bad actor coming into your network and stealing data, then I think the reason for a cyber liability policy begin to present themselves in many more ways. So back to you, Zach.
Yeah, and Kayla, your follow-up question about the cloud vendors themselves having coverage, either the answer is yes, or they're so liquid that they have cash to cover something like this. The problem is that again, your clients are entrusting you with that information, and then it gets into kind of idiosyncratic matters of discovery. Who was ultimately at fault for that data breach would then go into subrogation. If you were to say, hey, it's actually the cloud vendor's fault, there's still defense costs associated with that. So unfortunately, the cost to even determine whose ultimate fault it was through forensic analysis, through litigation, that would also be contemplated underneath the cyber policy. So we can definitely answer some more kind of control questions. A quick overview of the modeling we have here, because this is actually something that as I kind of plugged earlier, we're happy to do for you. If we have those couple of data points, we can run this specifically for your business. The NFP folks, I'm sure, have their own internal tools, and they'll actually be able to run this for you as well, upon request. I think what I really want you to take away from these slides is, no matter the size that you are, from a revenue perspective, how big your contracts are, these costs can escalate really quickly into the 6 and high 7 figures. We have the ability, based on our own internal claims information that we work with folks like Jen and her firm, to aggregate. We can get a very granular view at different threat vectors, different experiences on what ultimately that could cost. And that's when that conversation comes in with your insurance broker of, okay, what's our risk tolerance? What does our balance sheet look like? Construction, obviously, you guys have high material costs, high overhead. You don't necessarily are going to have, $10 million sitting on the balance sheet just waiting to be paid for a ransom. Additionally, I think earlier it was mentioned, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin being used in that discovery for the payment itself. There's no expectation that you have your own Bitcoin wallet, sitting there and going through market volatility, just ready to pay ransoms. That's another value add of the policy, is that those vendors will have that those funds available, if and or when it does become an issue. And so, this modeling slide, while it may not be super specific to everyone on the call, we can run this to kind of any threshold to make sure that it's as relevant as possible.
Great, thank you, Zach. Realizing we just have a few minutes left, we're going to do some rapid fire Q&A. So whoever wants to answer the question, please feel free to jump in. One question that came in, and if we don't get to one of your questions, we will follow up with you directly so that we do answer that or provide some time to talk through it. If my bank account is locked down with fraud protection, why should I be concerned about funds transfer fraud?
I can answer that one, because banks don't really care. not to be overly crude about it, but I've seen banks process wire transfers that with the incorrect account name, with the incorrect account number, with an address in Nigeria, right? Processing international transfers with no double checking of anything. And so there's a big issue with banks not doing their due diligence, I think, on a lot of these transfers. And so in fraud protection, if someone gets access to your bank account, they can legitimately disengage it. Or, you have social engineering where it's really quick. I had an insured who got a text message at 2 a.m. about a fraud alert and ended up spending the next week and a half talking to 3 different individuals who all turned out to be fraudsters, and he gave them access to their bank account, and they drained it of $100,000. So fraud protection is great, but still, insurance is there as a risk management tool when everything else fails.
Great, thank you, Rich. If we put in the claim for breach response and network recovery costs, how does this affect our insurance premium?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start from the broker perspective, and then I can let the carrier kind of give maybe a little bit too more sense from the carrier perspective. So, I mean, the real answer at the end of the day is it depends. A small claim that quickly closes out could have no effect, and a large claim that is very costly, takes a lot of time to ultimately close, could potentially be open for a long period of time. It could have an effect ultimately, directly on your premium. But what I say to my clients to this question is, let me as the broker fight how that will ultimately affect your renewal premium, and do not let the fear of an increase in premium be the cause that you find yourself in a position where you should have notified your insurer, and now you're either the matter is far worse, and it could have been rectified very quickly had you engaged your carrier, which would have then put you in contact with the right vendor, or worst case scenario, what you think is small becomes something that is much, much larger, because as Jen said, bad actors like to sit in networks and kind of creep around until they can make sure that they, really can do damage. And now you're at a point where you're in the worst case scenario, is that you're facing a carrier that does not want to pay the claim due to notification issues. So in a nutshell, let your broker figure that out later. Always notify your carrier.
Perfect. Another question for you, Courtney. How does NFP differentiate itself from other brokers when helping a client triage a cyber incident?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So, as an insurance broker, I think, and NFP more specifically, I think the answer to that is very twofold. So, one is preparation, and I cannot emphasize that enough. We really take the time to work diligently with our clients early in the insurance placement process, and not to just make sure that you're getting coverage. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of a broker, but really it should be more of a consultation. And we want to make sure that you are picking the right partners that are going to allow you to access the partners that you will ultimately want to work with in the event of a claim, and the ones that you're going to need in the event of a claim. So like Jen said, we make sure that as part of that renewal process, you're not speed dating at the time of the claim. You've already thought about what a carrier can offer to you, what vendor panels may be that you're going to want to work with, and all of that is part of our renewal process. And the second part is NFP. We do have a number of certified claims handlers. They are all attorneys. They work with our clients throughout the process from start to finish to make sure that you're taking full advantage of all aspects of the cyber policy, and that you make sure that you have a partner throughout the process. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Courtney. So to wrap up, there was another question that came in, and I'd like to go around the horn with this question. What is one thing that a company should do today to protect from cyber liabilities, exposures, etc.? So let me kick it off with Rich. Would you give us one top thing?
Yeah, I think it's really to have MFA in place, and really focus on that. And I analogize it to closing the mouse holes in the outside of your house, right? Like if someone breaks down your door, all right, it's still going to suck, but you're not going to have a bunch of little mice running around, right? So I think, doing MFA as much as you can on your email tenant, on any, remote desktop access to your network and things like that is one of the best ways you can stop any bad cyber incidents from occurring. Great,
thank you, Rich. There was a lot of head nodding going on there, realizing that's probably number one for all of us across the board. Courtney, why don't I go to you for a second one?
Yeah, so I assume we're probably going to hit on a lot of different controls, which are always, I think, the ultimate step. But as the broker here, of course, I'm going to say cyber liability insurance. I was talking to a CISO one time, and they told me that, he could potentially build the most ransomware-proof network if he didn't have any employees. And I thought that was so poignant because at the end of the day, as many controls and as much as we do to mitigate ransomware or any bad cyber incident, it doesn't make it 100% not going to happen. And so that's where cyber insurance really steps in as that last mitigating factor that all companies should take into consideration.
Correct. Great. Thank you. Zach, can I go to you for one?
Yeah, no, Courtney, I think that's a perfect tee up to kind of what I was going to suggest, which is implementing security, cybersecurity into the culture of the company. Again, the insurance policy is great. It gives you access to all of these resources in the time of a claim, especially at Coalition. We pride ourselves on that active mitigation. But the fact of the matter is that you don't want to have to deal with something like this. So having employee training in place for looking out for fraudulent emails, understanding the kind of chain of command when going through wire transfers, making sure you have callback provisions in place. Just like you have a culture of safety and security on the job site to protect your kind of physical being, you want to make sure that that's pervasive throughout your firm for the information and the critical infrastructure that powers your business.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Jen?
All right. So I think my one key takeaway, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to use a whole lot of words and make a few points in my one key takeaway, but don't learn on the fly and don't speed date. So there's a lot you can be doing now before you experience an event that makes you so much better prepared to respond to the event. And you want to get to know the stakeholders that will be involved in the incident response process. You want to understand what the incident response process is going to look like. You want to understand the legal and regulatory framework applicable to your organization. And you can do all of that by doing incident response planning exercises, tabletop exercises. But I would love, no matter when I meet you, I will be very happy to meet you. But I would love to meet you when you're not in the middle of a crisis so that we can talk when you aren't under a ton of pressure about exactly what you should be thinking about and doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Rick, why don't I kick it to you to close today's webinar?
Yeah, Rich, Courtney, Zach, Jen, Rick, thank you all so much for participating in this. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you for all of our participants on the call today, taking time out of your busy schedules to join. I want to remind everyone that within the next 24 to 48 hours, we will send you a recording of this webinar. And also, I encourage you, I think it's a great tool that Zach highlighted in terms of the modeling tool. I'll send out some instructions on what information is needed for that. It's very simple, high-level points, and we can run those modeling scenarios for you. So with that, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. We'll send out the recording. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.